Mainstreaming gender affairs seeks to integrate gender perspectives and considerations into all aspects of society and policy making. This aims to promote equity, reduce gender-based disparities, and promote equal opportunities. While mainstreaming gender affairs, it is important to know that the rights and empowerment of women are important to achieving social justice. And today we will look at the rights of women as we celebrate women across the globe this year. And my guest, Barrister Nduga Emekwere, is a legal practitioner. She will be speaking to us. Thank you so much, Ma, for joining us on Insights.
My pleasure.
And I celebrate you as a woman making tremendous impacts in your field.
Same to you.
Thank you. Now, talking about women, a survey revealed that it will take another 134 years to reach gender parity, and that's according to the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report of 2024. How realistic is this?
Well, 100 and something years is beyond my lifetime, and probably even beyond the lifetime of my children or my daughter. So that's quite a long time. It's very sobering. It's a very sobering reality. And the fact of the matter is that even at 100 and something years, it will not happen uniformly across different countries. Some countries will get there earlier than others. And for some countries, the sobering reality is that it probably will be 200 years. So I think it's 1 year too many, quite frankly.
1 year too many. Now, in advancing the cause of women, so many issues are involved, and looks like it's a bit difficult in most climes. Why is this so? Let's hear from you as a legal practitioner.
Well, as a legal practitioner, I always start from the law. We have the legal frameworks, some of the legal frameworks, or what I would say, the rudimentary aspects of the legal frameworks which are supposed to exist in the country to promote gender parity already exist. Starting from the 1999 Constitution, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of gender. That's already there, but it's not enough for something to be specified in law. There has to be more flesh given to it in policies and regulations that would actually make it possible for the objectives of the Constitution to be achieved. I give you a typical example. If you go into a lot of public buildings, you would see a ramp next to, if it's a storied building, you will see some steps at the entrance to the building, and right next to the steps you will see in very many places a ramp. But sometimes if you look at that ramp, the gradient of the ramp is so steep that it will take 3 people pushing someone in a wheelchair for the person to actually be able to use that ramp to access the building. And I think the same thing, that same analogy can be used for women empowerment in Nigeria. Although in theory, there doesn't seem to be any reason why women shouldn't be able to access anything they want or do anything they want or achieve the highest level of personal actualization. But in reality, actually getting there aren't really a lot of enabling factors that will enable you get there. So just similar to a disabled person who arrives at a public building and finds that ramp that is set at almost 40-something degrees gradient in height. The ramp exists. Somebody who designed that house probably went and ticked somewhere that, yes, we've put a disabled access ramp, but come and use it then. It's impossible to use. And it's the same thing with a lot of structures and measures and legislation that are supposed to enable women to become empowered, that are supposed to increase the participation of women and achieve that hallowed objectives of gender parity. Let's even start with a more realistic goal of increased women participation in the places that really matter, where decisions are being made. That for me, it's even a big start. I mean, as a lawyer, I'm not even supposed to consider the possibility, even in theory, that a woman is not equal to a man. But I'm thinking about, in terms of social life and economic life, what really happens? Are women really, do they really have the opportunities to participate equally with men? Or are they hindered, either legally, culturally, or practically, by the environment in which they find themselves? And to be honest, it doesn't only happen in Nigeria. It happens in very many places. I was just looking at some of the clips and the montage that has been produced for International Women's Day, and I was just suddenly struck by the fact that even as far back as 1776 in the United States, the US was still grappling with the issue of universal women's suffrage, being able to give all women the vote. Even in the US, it happened in phases, with some states granting women the vote much earlier than the others, and gradually. And it's even funny because the US, which sometimes parades itself as a paragon of democracy, was not one of the first, or even one of the first 25 countries in the world to grant women the vote. So I think it's something that we need to be aware of, the fact that there's a lot of work that needs to be done. It's not just enough to have books, legislation on the books. It needs to filter to the grassroots, not just a high level. A delegation of Nigerians went to Beijing and they signed a convention and so on and so forth. It needs to filter down from the constitution itself into the civil service, to the judiciary, the families, the communities. How do we actually implement these things? I think that's where we are, losing the battle, if I might put it that way.
Okay, you mentioned the issue of culture earlier, but there was a live conversation on this issue, and someone raised a very valid point. He said, women give life, but when it comes to issues to protect women, to address their needs, it is trivialized. Is this true?
I have to agree. For some reason, when it comes to giving women's needs and women's rights a priority, it seems to be a problem. And I'm not saying that Nigeria is alone. I mean, in some countries, they've actually taken measures to remove a lot of the taxes on men's hygiene products, like shaving sticks and shaving blades. But similar measures have not been implemented for simple things like sanitary pads, sanitary wear. I mean, in 2025, in Nigeria and many other countries, there are a startling number of women who don't have access to sanitary pads. In 2025, when it's been God knows how many decades since we put a human being on the moon. So it's those little things, those tweaks and sensitivities that actually come together to build up towards a more gender-sensitive environment that we are looking for to find. But the same constitution of Nigeria says that gender is a protected characteristic. How about they extend the mandate of that commission to include gender? They have the infrastructure. It wouldn't take much. It's already in the constitution. So yes, if they're really interested in equal participation, now they're thinking about where you come from. How about the gender? And if you look at the gender divide in Nigeria, the statistics say that Nigeria is approaching a 50-50 divide. So we're half of the moon, half of the sun.
Okay, before I take you on the rights of women, but I really want to believe that for a woman to advance in life, it starts from the family unit. How supportive is the family unit?
That's where culture comes in. I consider myself very privileged and blessed because of the kind of family background that I come from. Now, my father had the greatest misfortune of an African man to have 4 daughters and no sons. But my father believed that he was blessed, and he trained all his daughters to be completely rounded individuals. Like before I turned 18, my father told all of us that before you learn how to drive a car, you must learn how to check the oil, check the hydraulics, check the screen cleaning fluid. You have to learn how to change the spare tire. You have to learn how to sit down at the mechanic and babysit the car to learn about the fundamental things about maintaining a car. And I actually thought my father was one of the meanest creatures on earth, because my friends were doing nice things, girly things, making their hair, painting their nails, and I was sitting down in a mechanic, babysitting an old Peugeot 504 that belonged to 2 lecturers. Of course, it wasn't always in very good shape. But what that did for me was to make me more appreciative of the more practical things. In my home, there was nothing like, these are things that girls do, and these are things that boys do. For a start, there were no boys, so we had to do everything. My father taught us how to take care of ourselves, be on the lookout when you're out, about your personal safety. He said, yes, you are as good as any son, but you are not as strong as a boy, so you have to take extra care about your personal safety and security, to more respect. It was about the content of the person's character. And in that sense, I think my background is a bit unusual, because from the home, we're taught that There wasn't anything that guys could do that we couldn't do. So that mentality really shaped us from the very beginning. So for me, it took me a very long time to understand that my father was a feminist, because for me, it was, in my home, it was normal. Yeah, daddy will encourage you if you wanted to do something, as long as it was for the betterment of your career and it was good for you. He would encourage you. And he taught us to, when he used to go to the village to engage in construction of our family house, I had to be there counting the bags of cement and the blocks. And it really, it made me realize later in life that that exposure, that orientation from the family is so important, because mentally, a lot of women are limited from the home. Don't talk too much. Don't do like this. You can't study that course. It's not for girls. You can't do that. You shouldn't drive cars. You shouldn't be changing the tire and all that. You're limited in your own orientation. So the battle is even lost in your own mind, because you're already thinking that, oh, there's things that girls can't do that boys, that I'm not supposed to do this because I'm a woman. So it's ingrained. But I also concede that a lot of people have been wired to think that because they are female, they have limitations. So even before you step out of your house, you've been conditioned to think that you are less. And so I think that is, for me, it's a bigger challenge that can be addressed with legislation and policy. It has to come down to the home. Time I see a case of a woman going to court because she has to sue her in-laws, they've taken over her husband's property, or she has to sue the men folk in her family for a share in her parents' property. It makes me feel as if we are not really making progress. And I keep on pinching myself, like, are we in 2025 or 1905?
All right, talking about 2025 and rights, how do we accelerate actions to ensure that women's rights are protected for their advancement?
I think it has to be a combination of two things. When you say empowerment, I think empowerment is key. Empowerment is the ability of the woman herself, either alone or in concert with others, to influence policy and social development in her own favor. So that can be political, it can be economic, it can be educational. It comes in different forms. You don't have to be a lawyer to be aware of your rights. You just need to be aware of them. And it also takes a lot of courage, especially in Africa. And you also need a lot of support. So you need support. So on one side, you have empowerment. Then on the other side, there is the other side, which is the rights. The public and official recognition of the fact that these rights exist, and how these rights filter down into domestic policy and legislation, and filter down all the way down to the grassroots. That, for me, are the two sides of the coin. So if you're empowered, if you're aware, if you're conscious, but on the other side, you're fighting the whole world, you're fighting the whole country, because there doesn't seem to be a general consensus around the fact that you should have those rights. So it has to be a combination of both kinds of measures. So if, for instance, we go all out and say we're putting the laws into place, we're putting regulatory functions, we're putting in the policies in place, but the women are sleeping. They're not aware. They're not actually standing up. So there is no vacuum. If you don't take what is yours, somebody else will take it. And if you use the example of the suffragettes in the United Kingdom, some of them actually threw themselves under horses and carriages. They felt so passionate about it. I'm not advocating that anybody should kill herself in Nigeria because she's trying to assert her rights. But the point is that you'll have to fight for them. No one is going to hand them over to you on a platter of gold. That's just the truth. And we have a lot of things that work against women. And one of those is our culture. Almost uniformly, cultural values across the country do not help women, except in a few places where the rights of women have been traditionally protected. So I always use an example of the Cross River State and the ethics. So I think you have the empowerment on one side, which is directly targeted at the women, and then you have the mainstreaming and the sensitivity on the part of the government towards actually implementing those measures. Look, there is a space in society that belongs rightfully to women. And women, we don't just take up space, we bring change. So if you say a woman is excluded, you're excluding a potent aspect of social change.
Undiga Emekwe, I want to thank you so much for joining us on Insight. Thank you very much for your thoughts. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
My closing word this week is simple. Let us learn to listen more, to act justly, and to love unconditionally. Let this be the essence of our fast, the strongest and most important of our prayer points. And finally, let that also be our collective shared devotion. That's it for this week. I'll see you same time next week for more on insights. My name is Nnamdi Odipo.
And I'm Elizabeth Omori. We'll see you next week. Stay safe.